Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Metin, for actually organizing the special issue and and everyone for organizing this webinar. So I'm Paul Sajda, and I wanted to start by kind of giving a little advertisement for something that Metin mentioned, namely the IEEE Brain Initiative. So myself, Jose, and Matt, along with Mike Smith, have really been leading this initiative within IEEE, which has as a goal to facilitate cross-disciplinary collaboration and kind of coordinate activities across the IEEE societies and councils within the context of global brain initiatives. As many of you know, there have been several global brain initiatives launched worldwide in the United States, in the European Union, and China, and IEEE is trying to, in some sense, leverage the technology, standardization, as well as kind of the research acumen that its members have to affect the initiatives worldwide. And part of that is that many of the initiatives, instead of focusing solely on kind of basic neuroscience, they're focusing on development of new neurotechnologies. And technology development is really something that the IEEE community has a lot of expertise in. The initiative was started in September 2015, part of the Future Directions Committee, and it has really wide involvement across a number of societies and councils. There are a number of specific objectives and goals of the initiative, which involves bridging across these different global initiatives, also curating collaboration across different groups. Some of those groups are engineers and IEEE constituents. Some of those groups might be new IEEE members, so we're actually trying to do a lot of cross-disciplinary events and networking so that IEEE members can really interact more with some of the basic and clinical neuroscientists, in which really interesting multidisciplinary approaches can evolve. We're also interested in helping drive commercialization and standardization, something that IEEE has a lot of background in, and those of you that pay attention to the news and know that there's increasing interest within Silicon Valley on technologies, particularly related to brain-machine interfaces, you'll see that I think we're really at a critical time in the development of neurotechnologies where IEEE can play a major role. We're growing this technical community. One of the things, at least the near term of this initiative, is we focused on a specific area of brain science, namely brain-machine interfaces. I think you'll hear about some of that activity today in the talks. Here, in the long run, we imagine moving beyond just brain-machine interfaces, but we believe that that's really kind of a low-hanging fruit for IEEE. There's a lot of interesting problems and kind of engineering and research challenges relating to everything from sensing to power to computation that are really at the core of a lot of what IEEE folks do, and that kind of expertise can be brought to bear, and is being actually, quite honestly, brought to bear within the context of brain initiatives. So for those of you that are interested in more information about this, you can go to the website, brain.ieee.org. We have newsletters, we have outreach. We welcome your input, and if you're interested to volunteer in some of these activities, we would welcome that. So for my talk today, what I wanted to do was discuss some of the work that I've been doing in the context of brain-machine interfaces, but more from the cognitive neuroscience point of view. So you hear, I believe, like from Jose and work if Celestro could make it on, about different types of BMI systems that could be used for motor control, as well as new types of ways in which the systems could potentially be used to mitigate certain, let's say, neurodegenerative diseases, even potential psychiatric diseases. What I want to do is talk about how we could potentially use BMI kind of to understand certain situations in the cognitive neurosciences that are specific to how we interact with the world. So we don't not necessarily considering individuals that have some disease per se, but they might be, let's say, have to execute a task that has certain type of boundaries or constraints that cause their brain to, let's say, be in a state that we would want to modulate to improve their performance. And so is in trying to regulate cognitive flexibility during boundary avoidance. And so I have this picture of somebody with a cup of coffee, and I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but let's say you get a nice rug and you've got a full cup of coffee and you're walking across that rug, and it's really challenging to hold that cup straight and not spill. And it's surprising because if I changed that cup of coffee and made it a cup of water and you weren't on a rug, it turns out how you would do that task and essentially your level of stress and what you monitored in terms of how you controlled that cup would in fact be very different. So something about the fact that if you spill that cup of coffee on that floor, your spouse is gonna rebuke you, or you're gonna get in big trouble, is an issue. Same holds true as, imagine you're trying to walk on a balance beam, right? And the balance beam is very low to the ground, and I put a little, let's say, piece of chalk behind your foot, and I told you, all right, go as fast as you can across that beam. You could do it pretty quickly, even if you're a child who's not necessarily an expert at balance beam, and in fact you'd walk down it pretty straight. But now raise that beam 6 feet in the air, and I say, well, if you fall off of it, you lose a gold medal. Now the cost of basically falling off those boundaries, basically crossing those boundaries, is extremely high. And so the cost and the avoidance of those boundaries really changes how your brain processes information from the world. And it, in some sense, what it does is it makes reduce your cognitive flexibility. And so these are two kind of examples. There's actually a real-world example that's even more severe, and it's called pilot-induced oscillation. So, case, and it's a little video. Hopefully, you can see it. A plane and that's landing, and this plane, as you see, it crashes, and that oscillation effect has nothing to do with actually the flight dynamics. It has to do with the fact that this pilot is trying to land this plane on a runway, and that runway is this critical boundary. And typically they get into this mode where their arousal level increases, and instead of focusing on the information to land the plane, they focus on avoiding the boundary. And so they get into this mode, which is termed a pilot-induced oscillation, where they oscillate between pushing the stick down too much or pulling up too much. And this condition, pilot-induced oscillation, can be related to kind of a classic curve in psychophysics called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, where if you look at your arousal levels, how aroused you are during a task, relative to what your performance would be in the task, there's this inverted U-shaped function where if your arousal is very high, so let's say you're now worried about that boundary and crossing that boundary, your performance goes down dramatically for the task. But there's kind of a sweet spot of arousal. You're not, completely, fall asleep at the task, but there's kind of a midpoint of arousal where your performance is optimal. And the question is when you're in these types of boundary avoidance tasks, whether it's, filling this cup of coffee, or in this case, something more severe like piloting a plane, is there a way to downregulate arousal to keep you performance sweet spot? So if you look a little bit deeper into why arousal plays this critical role in cognitive flexibility and kind of the neurophysiological basis for these types of tasks, underlying hypothesis is that there's this regulation of functional interaction in a circuit. It's kind of macro scale circuit in the brain that involves the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, and a tiny nucleus in the brainstem called the locus coeruleus. And so this macro scale circuit across the brain has been kind of implicated in general functions of cognitive control. So if you look at the individual pieces of this circuit, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex has been intimately involved in forming decisions and assessing potential reward. Anterior cingulate plays a role of kind of monitoring the environment and storing internal models of the environment and then assessing control error when something switches in the environment. And locus coeruleus, which is also part of the norepinephrine system in the brain, is really arousal-based modulation that projects to these areas and switches the brain typically between exploitation and exploration. And so when about kind of what's going on in the brain, let's say in a PIO, the pilot is moving the stick down so it won't stall, but all of a sudden now what learned is you're getting closer to the boundary, so something is not consistent. There are errors being generated, and now all of a sudden the arousal turns up, and there's essentially a modulation, and there's this whole worry that, oh my goodness, I'm going to die. And so what happens is the brain switches from being this kind of flexible, in flexible circuit mode to